I'm going to read because if I tried to just sort of talk it wouldn't work. Roughly 15 years ago, around 2011 and 2012, I ghosted everyone I knew. I stopped answering texts and emails. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped going out. I pretty much disappeared. I have never apologized to anyone or offered an explanation. And I want to do that now. Very late. If I knew you back then, if I never responded to your texts and emails, if you were confused about why I cut off contact, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I ghosted you. I did feel bad about it then, and I still do now. I know I probably should apologize to people individually, but I don't have the courage to do that, so this video is the best I'm going to manage. I'm going to explain why I ghosted everyone. But it's going to be hard to explain that because it doesn't make sense. This is a story that doesn't make sense. It's baffling. It's weird. It's bizarre. I'm actually afraid that you won't believe me, but this story is true. It's real. It all happened. And fair warning, this story is intense and bad stuff happens in it. And if you're, not feeling great right now, if you're in a bad place emotionally right now, this isn't a good thing to watch. In late 2010, I developed a disease, myalgic encephalomyelitis, ME. So I got a disease in 2010. I was so sick that I was forced to drop out of my university course. At that time, I was a mature student at the University of Manchester. But me just getting a disease is not the really wild or terrible or crazy part of this story. I'm chronically ill and disabled now. But a lot of people are chronically ill and a lot of people are disabled. That's not the interesting part. So, it's 2010 and I have ME, but I don't know that I have ME. And neither do my doctors. The doctors told me that I had depression and anxiety. Okay. That kind of made sense at first. I mean, it didn't really make sense, but it kind of made a little bit of sense. My main symptoms were this crushing, debilitating exhaustion, like a fatigue far beyond anything I had ever experienced before. And cognitive problems. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't focus. I couldn't hold a thought in my head for more than a moment or two. I couldn't do math anymore. I just couldn't do math anymore. It is so weird to not be able to do things you used to be able to do. Now, I did also actually develop anxiety and depression for, I think, fairly obvious reasons. I think most people in that situation would become a bit anxious and depressed. My doctors were telling me it was all just anxiety and depression. And they told me that depression can cause symptoms like fatigue and pain and difficulty concentrating. And it didn't really make sense to me, but I thought they're doctors. They must know what they're talking about. And the doctors told me that I would get better very soon. And that was a wonderful thing to hear. I desperately wanted to believe it was true. But 6 months passed, and then a year passed, and I didn't get better. In fact, I got worse. I went to a doctor and I said, look, I think this is more than just mental health. And the doctor assured me that it was a mental health thing. And I said, well, then it's more than just anxiety and depression. If it's a mental health thing, it's something really serious. So this doctor put me on a wait list to see a psychiatrist, but the wait list was about a year. More time passed, my symptoms got worse. It became completely obvious that what was going on with me was physical. The exhaustion, the muscle weakness, the pain, the cognitive problems, it all got really extreme. And I told this to a GP. And this is where the story starts to get really, really strange. This is a very strange story. Over a period of a couple of years, I went to one doctor after another, and they all told me very seriously with a straight face that my symptoms were not as bad as I said they were. These doctors said that I wasn't really sick, that I just had sort of like ordinary aches and ordinary pains and ordinary tiredness. They told me that all the activities I couldn't do anymore, like walking, running, going upstairs, showering, they told me that I could do those things if I really tried. I just wasn't trying. It doesn't make sense to me now. It didn't make sense to me then. I had a doctor tell me that I wasn't really trying to get on with my life. And I said I was trying to get on with my life, I just couldn't. And the doctor said, "You're not really trying, you only think you're trying." Okay. I mean, I had a doctor tell me that I could go back to work if I really wanted to. I mean, that was, eesh. I mean, I desperately wanted to work. In the first few years of my illness, I tried full-time work. I tried part-time work. I tried part-time work from home. I tried a couple of hours per week of volunteer work from home. Like, I couldn't do any of that. I was barely managing to take a shower. There were times when I crawled because I couldn't walk. So it was very confusing. It was very confusing. These doctors didn't come out and say it, but they strongly implied that the real problems I had were just laziness and a lack of motivation. They basically blamed me for my illness. And I will admit that it messed with my head a bit. And there were moments when I believed the doctors were right. There were moments when I believed I was doing it to myself. And I believed, well, maybe my pain and exhaustion aren't real. Maybe I just think I'm exhausted, but I'm not really exhausted. Like, how would you know? Getting back to why I ghosted everyone. For the first 6 or 8 months of my illness, I didn't tell anyone I was sick. And that was because I thought it was going to be very temporary. I thought that I would get better, I would recover, I would go back to my old life. And I thought it would just be a little blip. So I didn't mention it to anyone. Once some time passed and it became clear I wasn't getting better, well, I still thought I was getting better, but I started to see that there was a longer time scale for recovery. I did tell some friends, some close friends, that I was having mental health problems. And I didn't really believe that. It didn't really make sense. But it was the only story I had to tell. That was what the doctors had said. It was all I had. So I told a few friends that I was having mental health problems. And I mean, people were really sympathetic and kind and supportive. But once my symptoms got really, really bad, when there were periods when I couldn't stand, I mean, I had to crawl on the ground. When there were times when I couldn't move at all. But I was still going to doctors and having them say it's just anxiety and depression. At that point, I actually found that I couldn't tell anyone anything. Because what could I say? If I told people I was sick, they would say, "Oh, what's wrong? What did the doctor say?" And then I would have had to say, "Well, the doctor says there's nothing wrong. The doctor says I'm fine. The doctor says I'm just a bit anxious, a bit depressed, but basically fine." And then they'd say, "Well, you've got a bad doctor, you should see another doctor." And then I'd have to say, "Yeah, I got a second opinion. I got a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh opinion." And the doctors all say the same thing. And at that point, like, what could I say? Could I say, all those doctors have got it wrong? They all say I'm fine, but actually the doctors are all wrong and I'm really, really sick? If I said that, I'd sound insane. I would sound really, really, really crazy. And not in the way of having like a bit of minor mental health problems. I would sound like I'd really lost it. It felt completely impossible to say that. I ghosted everyone because I didn't have a story I could tell about myself that made sense. And look, I never actually meant to cut off contact with anyone. It wasn't something I decided to do. What would happen is I'd get a text or I'd get an email from someone, and I wouldn't be able to think of how to respond. So I'd put it off. I'd wait a few hours or a day or two, and I'd come back to it, and I still wouldn't be able to think of a way to respond. Like, people would say, "Hi, how are you doing? I haven't seen you for a while." What would I say? If someone says, "How are you doing?" How would I possibly respond to that? There was no way for me to respond to that. I would compose a text over and over, like start a text over and over, or start an email. Like, my drafts folder was full of half-composed texts that I never sent. And after a few days, when you haven't sent the text and you haven't responded, it starts to feel a little weird. I actually felt incredibly stressed and incredibly ashamed about this. And all the time that I was ignoring people, I was very lonely and isolated, and I desperately wanted to talk to someone, but I just couldn't figure out what to say. For a very long time, I did believe I was going to get better. The doctors kept telling me that I would get better. I actually kind of needed to believe that, so I did believe it. I kept telling myself that soon I'd recover, and then I'd pick up my life where I left off, and I'd pick up my friendships where I left off. And it wouldn't matter that I'd been out of contact for a few months, or even a year, or 2 years, or 3. And that is how my life became a Kafkaesque nightmare. Everything would have been different if the doctors had simply said, "I don't know what's wrong with you." That would have been fine. That would have been a story I could tell people. People would have understood. I could have just told people, "I'm really sick and the doctors don't know what to do and they can't help." Like, people would have understood that. I could have talked to people. I could have asked for support. People would have been kind and supportive. That would have been a story I could tell. I don't want to get too much into the financial side of it, but I will quickly say that when you are too sick to work, and you don't have a doctor willing to write a sick note, and you don't feel that you can ask your family for help, things get pretty scary pretty fast. When I say I ghosted everyone, that includes my own family. And here's the thing, my mother is kind and loving, and she had the financial means to help me. And if I had gone home and said, "I'm really sick, I can't work, I need help," my mother would have helped me. But here's the thing, she would have said, "Katie, what's wrong with you? What did the doctor say?" And if I told her that I went to see doctor after doctor after doctor, and they all said that I'm actually fine and I should go back to work, and they were all saying that, they were all very specifically saying that I should go back to work. If I said that, then my mother would have said, "Well, then Katie, you should go back to work," because she would have thought that was the right thing for me. She would have thought that just allowing me to live without working would have been bad for me. And if I insisted that I was really sick, and if I insisted that all those doctors were all wrong, and I was really, really sick, even though every medical professional said I was fine. Look, long story short, very long story, very short, I was afraid that I would be involuntarily committed to a mental institution. I thought about that a lot. It was on my mind. I was thinking about it over and over, going over it in my mind. And yeah, I thought that I would be forced into a mental hospital against my will. And I thought that would completely destroy me. I want to talk for a minute about my fear of being sectioned. because I know that sounds really paranoid. And back then in 2012, I didn't know anyone who had been sectioned, so I didn't know if that's a thing that happens. I didn't know if I was being paranoid or not. And of course, that's just another thing where I question myself. Sometimes I thought I was being reasonable, sometimes I thought I was being paranoid. But fast forward 10 years to 2022. I finally get a diagnosis of ME, and I become connected to a wonderful, supportive community of other people with ME. And I learned that people being wrongly psychologized and being even wrongly sectioned is absolutely a thing that happens in our community, and we have stories about this. I heard about one young man who everyone said was the loveliest person you could ever meet. His ME got worse. He was more severe than I am. He got so sick he couldn't care for himself, so he asked for a carer. He asked for someone to come into his home and help him, get to the toilet and things like that. So he went through that application process, and he was entitled to a carer, or he should have been. But somewhere in that process, some doctor decided that he wasn't really sick, or he wasn't physically sick. They decided it must be something psychiatric, and he was sectioned and imprisoned in a mental health unit for 2 months. And when he got out, he killed himself. There's a harrowing documentary called Voices from the Shadows, which follows children with the disease I have, ME, who are forced into psychiatric facilities against their will and against their parents' will. And some of the children managed to film what happened to them in this facility. And it's very hard to watch. That documentary is from 2011, but I have no reason to believe that doesn't still happen now. So at the time I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Now I know I wasn't. I was absolutely right to fear that. Okay, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to 2012. In 2012, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know I had ME. I didn't know anything. Months stretched into years. And several years into my illness, something happened that changed things for me, not for the better. I developed fibromyalgia, but I didn't know it was fibromyalgia, and neither did my doctors. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain syndrome. Now, I had had some pain ever since I got sick, but up to this point, the pain I had was just sort of annoying pain. It wasn't my most important symptom. But now the pain increased. It went from annoying to bad, but mostly manageable, to constant agonizing pain. Even if all my other symptoms had disappeared, this pain would have stopped me from being able to do anything. I don't remember that time very well. I think when you're in really extreme pain, your mind protects you by not forming memories. You're basically just always trying to survive the present moment, and you never think about the past, and you never think about the future. Of course, when I was able to, I dragged myself to the GP surgery and had a rheumatology exam, which didn't turn up anything, and the doctor sent me on my way. But the pain continued, so I went back a few weeks later and saw a different doctor. This is where the story gets even weirder. The doctor told me I wasn't really in pain. I said that yes, I very much was in pain. A tremendous amount of pain. And the doctor just said very dismissively, no, you're not. And this was so bizarre. I didn't know how to deal with it. I was baffled. I'm still baffled. I was used to having my symptoms dismissed and minimized. I was even used to doctors sometimes sort of not really hearing me when I told them certain things. But Having a doctor tell me bluntly that my agonizing pain did not exist, that was just new to me. It was new. It was a whole new level of, well, it was, I kind of shrugged it off. I told myself that doctor must just be having a really bad day. Like maybe the doctor was really stressed out and really tired, and maybe he was just so emotionally overwrought that he wasn't thinking straight and he didn't even notice that he was talking nonsense. So I thought, never mind that doctor. I'll just come back in a few weeks and see a different doctor. So that's what I did. The next doctor said the same thing. Doctors kept telling me over and over again that my pain didn't exist. They told me that I wasn't really in pain. I only thought I was in pain. They told me that I was oversensitive. They told me that I was really just experiencing normal aches and pains. They told me that I was paying too much attention to my pain and I should just think about other things instead. I think if I had been healthy, I would have realized at this point that these doctors just didn't know anything. They were talking absolute nonsense. But pain stops you from thinking clearly. And all of this, the pain, the isolation, the medical professionals telling me over and over and over that my agonizing pain wasn't real, it kind of broke me. Well, it broke me. It destroyed me. It destroyed my confidence. It destroyed my sense of self. I constantly questioned myself. I didn't trust my own perception of reality. It broke me. And it kind of convinced me that I was to blame for what was happening to me. And looking back, it is very clear to me that what these doctors did to me was abuse. It was abuse. I can see that very clearly now. Telling someone that their pain does not exist, that is a very, very advanced form of psychological torture. But at the time, I didn't understand that. Back then, I would lie in bed, which was where I spent most of my time, and I would go back and forth. One moment now of course, my agonizing pain is real, but the next moment I think maybe it's not real, maybe I'm somehow deluded, maybe the doctors are right, maybe I'm doing it to myself. I spent 7 years like that. And when I think back on that time, it's like I fell down a very deep, very dark hole. And I'm grateful that I don't remember it very well. After 7 years, things changed again. My fibromyalgia went into remission. Over a period of a year or so, the pain went from agonizing to moderate to manageable, low-key pain. I still had ME. I was still chronically ill, but the pain was mostly gone, and I regained some ability to function. By then, I had long since realized that doctors are not trustworthy people. I knew I couldn't turn to doctors. I knew that if I ever wanted to find out what was wrong with me, I had to figure it out for myself. And I began spending a bit of time each day. I didn't have much functional time, but I had a bit. I began spending a bit of time each day researching my symptoms. Over a few weeks and months of this, I worked out that I had ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. I went back to my GP surgery, and this time I told the GP that I had ME. And I talked her through my symptoms, and I showed her how they perfectly lined up with the clinical guidance. And now that I had some knowledge, it was very clear to me that this doctor didn't know anything. She nodded along, and she tried to give the impression that she was familiar with the clinical guidance, and it was very obvious that she wasn't. I got a diagnosis of ME, but I learned that the NHS, the UK's National Health Service, does not provide any medical treatment for people with ME. There is no medical specialist that you can be referred to. And I was in for yet another shock. Now that I had a diagnosis, I was able to join a local ME support group. I attended my first support group meeting over Zoom, and I told the people there about my experiences. And the people in this meeting were wonderfully warm. They were kind, supportive, understanding, sympathetic. What they were not is surprised. They were not surprised. One person after another told me their own stories, which were all similar to mine. Some were much worse than mine. They had all been disbelieved. They had all been gaslit. And many of them had become isolated, either because friends and family didn't believe them, or because they didn't talk about what was happening to them out of fear of being disbelieved. There was a kind of weariness to the way these people spoke, as if they didn't have the energy to get angry anymore. I had only just realized what had happened to me. I had only just realized that I had been dismissed and gaslit, and I was angry about it. But these people, to them it was old hat. It was a story they'd heard a million times before. I should say that there was one person in this support group meeting who said that her GP was kind and helpful and supportive right from the start. There are some good doctors out there. After that, I became very involved in the ME community. The knowledge I gained from my fellow ME sufferers vastly improved my life. They taught me how to manage my illness properly. For the past decade, I had been pushing myself over and over into something called post-exertional malaise, or PEM, which is a very dangerous and sometimes very, very long-lasting kind of relapse. I learned how to pace myself to avoid PEM. My symptoms evened out. I stopped having crashes. I learned that the advice my doctors had given me over and over for the past decade to push myself, to exercise more, to try as hard as I could to get back to a normal life, all of that had kept me in more or less constant PEM for about a decade, and this had likely caused my ME to get worse over time. I became involved in campaigning for people with ME to get better medical care, and from 2022 to 2024, this campaigning work was the main focus of my life. Recently, I took a step back from it, mainly because it took up so much of my limited energy. It hit me recently that although I have a wonderfully supportive ME community, full of lovely people who understand what I've gone through, I have never been able to tell my story to anyone outside of that community. I've been coming to understand what those doctors stole from me all those years ago. They stole my ability to tell the truth about what happened to me. They made me silent. They made me disappear. I was ashamed back then, but I was never the one who should have been ashamed. I didn't do anything wrong, and my illness was not my fault. So this video is really me taking back what they stole from me. I'm telling my story. This is my story. This is what happened. It was awful. It was really, really awful and very strange, but I survived. I'm still here. And that is really all I had to say. Thank you so much for watching this. It means a lot to me that you watched this. And I know it wasn't exactly a lot of fun, but thanks for watching this. And if you tried to get in touch with me back in the 2010s, and I never got back to you, I'm really sorry. You have my sincere, belated apology. I'm sorry I ghosted you.